Very good evening to you and welcome to The Bottom Line, a wrap of the business news of the day. I'm Frances Hurd. And it was a bad day for the Rand, ahead of the Heritage long weekend. And that is the number of the day. Let's take a look. The Rand weakening to above 17 Rand to the dollar today. Now, this week alone, the currency has lost more than 4%. The Rand started the year trading at around 14 Rand to the dollar, but it fell hard after the lockdown was implemented. It reached 19 Rand to the dollar in April, just to put this all into context, and reached an all-time high of 19.35 against the dollar. We say all-time high because, of course, as it weakens, it takes more rands to buy a dollar, but actually that was the weakest point ever for the Rand. After that, there was something of a recovery, and it was trading closer to 16 Rand to the dollar earlier this month, but many of the gains have been wiped out this week. Let's look at what's weighing on the Rand right now. Firstly, fears of a second wave of COVID-19 infections possibly weighing on global growth. Investors' sentiment may also have soured because of Treasury committing to bail out the state-owned airline SAA once more. The airline, you'll recall, requires more than 10 billion Rand for its restructuring as proposed by the business rescue practitioners. Government currently looking for that money. To discuss, we're joined by economist and Director of Econometrix, Azar. Azar, thank you for being with us. We're looking good in terms of infections here in South Africa. Just explain why high rates of infections in the US and Europe are affecting our currency.
The concern is that as a result of the increased rate of infections overseas to their highest levels in some cases ever, that these countries will have to restrict movement and, in a sense, reimpose lockdowns. Many of them have already restricted the permission for people from certain countries to actually visit them. And as a consequence, the concern is that this will be negative for global economic growth. And given that it will be negative for global economic growth, people won't be able to travel around as much as before. The same old fears that engulfed us in April will be back again and result in increased risk aversion around the world. And when that happens, investors tend to shy away from riskier assets, particularly those of emerging markets, including Rand assets and the Rand itself, and go and seek the safe haven of the US dollar. And that's what's actually been happening again this week.
Yeah, and I don't know if you saw the attack by US President Donald Trump against China yesterday, but I guess tensions between China and America not helping either.
That's the other factor that is weighing heavily down on sentiment. Concerns that the spat between the US and China is just not ending and is bad for economic growth prospects globally. And the third factor is nervousness surrounding the US presidential election, which comes in 6 weeks' time, or even less than that. And in particular, people are unclear in their own minds as to what the best outcome will be for markets. There is a concern that if Biden wins, he's going to raise taxes sharply and regulate a lot of businesses far more than has been the case under the Trump administration. And this could be bad news for corporate earnings and therefore for the markets as well.
Yeah, and remember how everyone got it wrong last time, the effects on the markets of Trump coming in the first place. But Azar, there's also speculation about our own debt here in South Africa and the fact that government is scrambling for 10 billion Rand for SAA. So the finance minister still to announce where that's going to come from. If we're being frank, did investors want government to dump the airline, basically?
Investors are very concerned about the extent to which South Africa its economy is being plunged into a debt crisis. The increase in our debt burden over the past year has been nothing short of dramatic. Our borrowing requirement, which was in the region of only 200 billion Rand just over a year ago, then was increased to about 400 billion rand following the medium-term budget policy statement in November last year. And then following the supplementary budget that we had in June, it's quite clear that tax revenues are falling so short and government is obliged to spend more simultaneously on various relief measures. And the borrowing requirement is now estimated, projected to be 775 billion rand. And in recent times, with the release of the shocking second quarter GDP figures, a lot of people saying is the economy will be still weaker even than what was being projected in the June budget, and therefore the borrowing requirement could well expand to over 800 billion rand. Just to put that into perspective, the country's GDP itself is 4.9 trillion rand. So we're talking about government having to borrow possibly 16, 17, 18% of what is being produced in the economy in a single year. And how is this going to be reversed? It can only be reversed by improved growth in the longer term. But then we see that there are huge structural impediments, including government's unwillingness to cut down on bailing out state-owned enterprises. And this is where the SAA thing fits in. 10 billion in the context of 800 billion rand borrowing requirement is not huge, but it's the symbolism that this move represents that has been taken very negatively in the markets.
Yeah, and I guess it all adds up. Then finally, Azar, very quickly, where's it all going? I mean, given where we are, the debt situation, given the fears before we were downgraded, and then we were by all three major credit rating agencies, could the rand actually have been worse, or could it get worse in future?
I think the rand can get worse. I think it has already got worse. We've got to bear in mind that on a real trade-weighted basis, if it were to be trading in line with its average purchasing power over the past 30 years, the rand should be at somewhere between 13 and 14 rand to the dollar. The fact that it's been trading at 16, 17 and 18 to the dollar suggests that investors are already penalizing or reluctant to buy rands at any higher rate. And the further that this deteriorates, the more likely it is that the rand could well weaken. I'm not saying that it will do so dramatically and immediately, but it is extremely vulnerable. And the way that SAA symbolism could well be the turning point, the catalyst that causes the main credit rating agencies to downgrade our ratings still deeper into junk status when they review our ratings at the end of November and early December. And what goes hand in hand with that is that investors then demand even higher long-term interest rates, and it costs government even more to borrow money from wherever it is, because they have to pay higher interest rates on that, and that squeezes out government's ability to spend on other critical areas.
So this debt cycle, downward negative cycle. Thank you for explaining. Thank you, as always, Azar Jammine from Econometrix. And we'll follow the woes of the rand. Of course, markets close next week, but currency is still trading. We'll see how it plays out over the next few days. Now, the Competition Tribunal has heard